Hello, everyone, and welcome into CrushTheStreet.com. I'm Kenneth Amadori. And unless you've been living under a rock, well, I guess a lot of people live under rocks nowadays, but cryptocurrencies have been pumping again. Bitcoin is $9,500, and a lot of the altcoins are following as well. We just got news that the 10-year Treasury bond hit 3%. And obviously that had a lot of implications and even the Dow Jones reacted pretty volatilely today, was down 500 points, 600 at one point, and then closed at around 424 points down. And that actually happened out of nowhere. It was mid-market. Things were fine, and then the floor fell out from underneath the Dow Jones. So there's a lot of instabilities out there. And we know that people are finding and coming across cryptocurrencies because it's this decentralized version of money, especially Bitcoin. And it's a solution to all that's going on in the financial system. So to talk about all of this stuff today with us is Crypto Bud. His name is Ivan. He's got a great YouTube channel. He's got a website. Crypto Bud, thanks for coming on CrushTheStreet.com.
Thank you very much, Kenneth. I really appreciate the opportunity today to kind of share with the audience some of the exciting stuff happening.
Absolutely. Well, if you would, let's talk about Bitcoin. Obviously, we're seeing it move up a little bit now, and it's pretty exciting. I mean, what are your thoughts on this? We saw it hit a high of 20,000, really sell off big, probably more than most people were expecting. But we're starting to, I guess, believe that we hit a bottom here. Bitcoin's coming up, and we're at 9,500 as we speak. So what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, you know, I've been doing a lot of research for the last 2 weeks. I've been running my own trading group, and we've been, obviously YouTube has been a great outlet for me to analyze. I've been extremely active in this market, and a lot of people a couple of weeks ago were talking about Bitcoin going to 4K. And I kind of was very similar in that camp, but I think that it got too pessimistic. I think the last, as a social influencer, as a YouTube personality, and as someone who monitors social media, I saw that we were really capitulating the last couple of weeks. Now, that's not to say we probably can't revisit those levels again, but we've swung back quite a bit since that 6K low, and I do think that right now we're starting to see that negativity just kind of dissipate. And I firmly believe that we have somewhat found an intermediate bottom, at least in the short term for the next couple of months, just because the news that has been coming out has not been really fit the narrative that this is going to end. I've been at conferences. I've just came back from Amsterdam with the NEO team, and just seeing the projects, forget about the price, forget about Bitcoin's meteoric rise to 20K. We're just talking about the projects and the quality of the projects coming out. Leads me to believe that, at least for me, and I did some really crazy stuff, like going all in a couple of things. But I firmly believe that we are in the midst of a recovery just from what we've been seeing. I mean, it's been 3 months since we've come out from 20K, and I do think that the market has to swing the other way. That's just the way market cycles work.
Yeah, no, excellent. And you obviously have a history in researching markets, following markets, trading markets. And, you know, one of the things that I would bring up to you is you probably remember the gold bear market. And gold did have those times where it went up again. It had those relief rallies. And that was over the course of 4 years. And you even mentioned it right now that we're only 3 months into this. And I'm curious, you know, just to play devil's advocate here, is there any sort of risk going into this that, you know, might lead you to believe that we could go lower?
Yes, the only thing I could think of right now, and again, I always tell people, I said, you know, you always have to have a plan for your bull side and your bear side. So although I'm optimistic, I'm not being naive that we're going to head straight at 20K. The only thing that I can think that can derail this is the regulation. That regulation has not been ironed out since last year. And in fact, the SEC has cracked down on various ICOs, and other countries have clamped down on ICOs specifically. And that actually is going to choke off a lot of new capital. So if tomorrow let's just say the government says, you know what? Crypto is illegal in the United States. Everything's a security. We're going to shut down 2 exchanges. It's game over. It doesn't really matter at that point how great that project is. And government, a lot of people underestimate the power of the government and how they can shut down stuff like, for example, China. I mean, that was a great example of that. So yes, I do think that we are pretty much skating on thin ice in terms of regulation. There's a lot of projects out there right now that I think that are skirting the law. And if the government wants to, with the flick of a pen, they could basically bring the whole house down. So I think that's going to be the biggest risk going to 18. And I think if somebody says, can we go back to 4K, 5K? Well, not go back, but can we go to 4K, 3K, 1K Bitcoin? That's going to be what I call breaking the camel's back. So I would be cautiously optimistic in terms until the regulation space clears up.
So what does it say about Bitcoin then if you're so concerned about regulation, damaging its credibility and, influencing the price to such a large degree? Wasn't that really what Bitcoin was supposed to be, so resilient and, anti-fragile and all of these things that would sidestep any sort of regulation and conventional governmental controls?
Yeah, you make a great point because Bitcoin really came out of the financial crisis back in '08. And if you remember, the real reason why we have crypto was because we wanted to avoid another financial crisis. The problem is that Bitcoin has now entered into, it's not just Bitcoin now. We have almost 1,500 to almost close to 2,000 altcoins. And the market cap has grown to close to, our peak was almost $800 billion. Now, Bitcoin's dominance, if you take a look at current dominance, is under 40%, which means that the altcoin market has now taken the lead in terms of market cap. So Bitcoin, unfortunately, at one point before 2017, Bitcoin's dominance was 80%. And that was a very different market than now. So Bitcoin, yes, is very resilient to government. However, if you take a look at its dominance, it's fallen down to about 40% its current rates, which means that those 60% of altcoins are at serious risk for any sort of regulation. So going back to this idea, if Bitcoin's dominance rises back to 80%, that would mean that most of these altcoins would go away, which means most people will lose a lot of money and market cap will eventually drop. Remember that we reached a peak of close to $1 trillion in January. And that was because we had a lot of these altcoins coming out. So those are not resilient to government intervention. And I can name a few right now that I think are very close to potentially getting some sort of government scrutiny. And Coinbase is a great example of not listing coins that they think could get them in trouble. And that's the reason why we haven't seen a lot of that going on. So with the exception of Litecoin, Bitcoin Cash, a lot of these altcoins, I personally think that are very vulnerable to any sort of government interventions.
Mm. Yeah, no, I definitely understand what you're saying there. Okay, so one of the things that you brought up during this interview, and I've seen on the work that you put out, great work by the way.
Oh, thank you.
You talked a lot about competing platforms to Ethereum.
Yeah.
Neo being one of them, and there's also Icon. And I'm curious as to, number one, what are your thoughts on Ethereum as of lately? And then I'd like to ask you a little bit about these other coins, for that matter.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of people made a lot of money in 2017 on Ethereum. I mean, if you came in crypto back in March, February, there's a good chance you held on to Ethereum. Ethereum has been very good to a lot of people. Anybody who came into crypto before 2017 was probably made a lot of money on Bitcoin. Now, if you actually think about it, Ethereum's problems have just accelerated after it became the second dominant cryptocurrency. And one of the problems I find with Ethereum, and although I think it was a great project, and I think it still is somewhat of a good project, the problem with Ethereum is its scalability, as I was mentioning before. The Ethereum camp, they have a lot of developers. So one of the advantages of Ethereum is that they have a massive team that has supported Ethereum on all different levels. The only problem I see is, aside from the function of Ethereum as an ICO platform, there hasn't been a lot of use cases for it. Governments have not been really that supportive of Ethereum. They have the Ethereum Alliance with some of the well-known, institutions. But some of the other platforms that I'm seeing have made a lot more inroads into Ethereum. And one of the problems is Ethereum's transaction speeds and its scalability. Technologically speaking, it's not built for massive scalability, as we've already seen before in the last couple of times. Now, also proof of stake has not really come on board. They've already been talking about doing proof of stake for the longest time. And they pretty much have not really released any sort of credible solution aside from little patchworks, like, for example, the Raiden network, and also they were talking about Plasma and Casper, but it's been really, really slow. And so until they resolve these issues, Ethereum is going to struggle tremendously as the other platforms get in. So although I am bullish because it is definitely the second most popular, strongest cryptocurrency out there, I do think that its time is becoming very limited. And I do hope the developers understand that. But a lot of people are becoming very complacent on the Ethereum camp. So I personally think that they started out as a pioneer in the smart contracts business, but I do think that they're losing their edge as these other platforms are coming on. Now, the second question you ask is, what are some of the other platforms? So I've been covering a lot of platforms. And one of the reasons why I think Ethereum may end up having to share some of that pie is because these platforms are providing the solutions that Ethereum cannot provide. And one of them is scalability. And one of them is, I like to talk about is Neo. I've been a heavily proponent of Neo's ecosystem because they're out there trying to drum up support for developers. They're trying to do partnerships with different countries. They are establishing themselves as a company that is serious about bringing enterprise solutions in there. Ethereum is very similar to, I think, an open source platform that has a great idea, but they haven't been able to really appeal to the business community. And that's where I think its edge is going to be for these upcoming platforms like Cardano, like EOS specifically, which we saw today. EOS has been on a massive tear. And one of the reasons why it's because EOS is very clear about where it wants to be. Ethereum is kind of all over the place. And so I think that lack of direction has allowed other platforms to come in. And I can go a little bit into detail specifically about each one, but I think ICX is a great example, which I just covered recently, is partnering up with the right people and the right institutions.
Yeah, that's interesting. And when you were talking about Ethereum, I know a lot of people have had issues with Bitcoin and its ability to scale. I mean, that's been the reason why a lot of people went over to Bitcoin Cash.
Yeah.
And but Bitcoin has that first mover advantage too, and I believe Ethereum's going to benefit from that as well. But being that you talked about Ethereum and the problems that Ethereum has, what are your thoughts on Bitcoin and Bitcoin holding its role as this wealth storage gold standard in the cryptocurrency space?
Great question. I firmly believe that Bitcoin is definitely going to be moved into an asset class. Now, I've seen a lot of institutions right now jumping on the bandwagon of salivating over the idea of getting an ETF up and running for Wall Street. And I do think that right now there is a movement and a push for moving Bitcoin away from becoming a currency into becoming a asset class, kind of like a gold type. And Wall Street is very, very keen on basically using Bitcoin as a derivative product. And that wasn't the original vision of what Bitcoin was supposed to be. It was supposed to kind of offset the fiat idea of currency, but what they're trying to do now is use it as like a stock. And if you think about what a stock really is, it's basically kind of like a hedge against inflation. It's a hedge against the dollar. And they're treating Bitcoin like that. So I think there's going to be a very significant role for Bitcoin to becoming digital gold, literally digital gold, replacing gold. And the reason why I say that, it's because gold, unfortunately, doesn't have it has a lot of shortcomings in regards to storage of wealth. And so Bitcoin, I think, slowly is going to transform itself into an asset class that people are going to hoard and hold, not necessarily to use as a currency. And until the dollar and until these other fiat currencies begin to stabilize and do not depreciate, there's always going to be a market for gold and anything that appreciates against the dollar. And I do think that Bitcoin is the only one right now that people are confident in because it's been around for almost 10 years. It's a brand. People already know about Bitcoin. And number three is secure in many different aspects, although that could be debated, but it's more secure than many of the situations, other asset classes that we have right now. So the future of Bitcoin is very bright. I'm not going to be using Bitcoin to buy a cup of coffee. I mean, I'll just tell you up front. And I think most people are not going to do that because it's going to be considered to be a asset class, in my opinion. Now, how people treat the other coins, like Bitcoin Cash, that's going to be a different story because I think those are going to be used more as a currency. But the movement right now is trying to create an ETF that's most likely going to be an asset class that's going to come off of Bitcoin's rise in value. And so if you're holding Bitcoin right now, the future is very, very strong as long as the fiat currencies keep on depreciating because there's nothing right now that people want to get away from, which is going to be fiat.
You know, I was reading an article today and someone did the numbers for if Bitcoin was to be valued at the same market cap as gold, right? $8 trillion roughly.
Yeah.
And I think they came up with a number that Bitcoin would have to rise to $380,000 to be equal to gold if at the current amount of Bitcoin that are out there and at gold's current market cap. And just like you said, if the fiat currency situation is imploding, it could even be argued that gold should be higher. So it may not even necessarily be that Bitcoin takes gold's role, but supplements it. Gold goes to 20 trillion and Bitcoin goes to 8. I mean, there's a lot of different scenarios here.
Yeah, and you know what? One of the things that people don't understand is that gold is it's very difficult to hold. I mean, if you hold a bunch of gold in your house, you're probably going to have problems with storage and security. The other thing is gold has historically, it's been manipulated on many levels. The new generation does not really own gold. I can tell you millennials right now are not really into that. And I do think that there was a generation that held onto gold, our parents, maybe our great-grandparents. And that was a time, but now I firmly believe literally that at some point Bitcoin is going to eat gold's lunch for a storage of value. And the reason why is because it's global. And there's a crop of generation like you and me that use digital. We live in a digital world now. Mm-hmm. And I think that's going to drive a lot of value. I mean, I don't know. I can ask anybody on the street right now, do you own any gold? And most people would kind of look at you like, as jewelry? Most people don't really own gold. And if they do own gold, they own it in some sort of derivative product, but they don't actually physically hold it. Bitcoin, you can actually hold and you can tell people about this. And so I think that's going to be the game changer in the next, I'd say, give it about 5-10 years, where Bitcoin evolves away from a currency into some sort of asset class, the gold. And that's going to be a big one. And that price projection that they put out, I think that's very, very reasonable. I mean, if you look back 10 years ago, people didn't expect Bitcoin to be at 20K.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic for sure. A lot of what gold's role is stored by government, stored by central banks. Yeah. And I'm wondering, do you think that's something Bitcoin is going to fulfill going forward? Because if that starts happening, I mean, the price is going to have to absolutely skyrocket. I mean, if that sort of capital starts to be injected into cryptocurrency, specifically Bitcoin, I mean, the price for Bitcoin would need to skyrocket.
No, governments, institutions are already. I mean, I'm not speculating at this point. I'm already, I've already read a couple of articles. Like, for example, Goldman Sachs just opened up a trading desk for crypto just yesterday. The Winklevoss twins have been pushing ETFs on Wall Street for the last years. We also have the acquisition of Poloniex by Circle, which is basically owned partly by Goldman Sachs. We have Coinbase trying to change into an exchange, file regulations with the SEC to become a licensed security. The movement's already there. In the United States, they've already launched several Senate testimonies, for congressional hearings specifically, about how the role of Bitcoin is going to be in the United States. We already have comments from both the SEC and also the futures commissions talking about how they need to regulate this space. The bottom line is that government agencies are beginning to lay out the infrastructure and the groundwork for making Bitcoin owned by institutions. It's not, and also OTC trading. I'm not sure if you read the news on this one, has been an all-time high. Institutions are already trading Bitcoin off the main exchanges. They're actually doing over-the-counter trading, which means that they actually value Bitcoin to be able to move millions of dollars back and forth. Look, the liquidity is there. The demand is there. The government just is a little slow in doing that. Once the government paves the way for regulation, they allow Poloniex to start issuing out ETFs, you're going to get a flood of institutional investors coming in, and at some point, governments are going to start owning Bitcoin. I personally believe that the U.S. government and any of the developed countries are probably going to start buying some sort of Bitcoin in their vaults at some point. But that's going to be a little bit later in the future once they see the institutions come in, just like what happened with gold. Remember, if you look at the history of gold, gold was actually confiscated by the government in the 1930s during the Great Depression. There was an executive order coming out by Franklin Roosevelt who was talking about that nobody could own gold because they had to fight off the war effort. I do find a time when potentially that could actually happen. Now, again, conspiracy theories aside, tinfoil hats aside, it started off with people hoarding gold because of the issue with inflation. Then what happens, the government stepped in and said, look, we need it now because of the war effort. Look at the debt levels that are happening right now in all developed countries. If Bitcoin is rising in value, fiat currency is going down, gold is not going anywhere, what do you think the next step is going to be? And I personally think that the government, just like what they did with gold, may happen. Now, again, right now, so far-fetched because everybody's saying the government is not for crypto, but just wait, and you'll find out that if something is rising in price against their fiat currencies, everyone's going to want to hedge. You would be crazy not to.
That's powerful stuff there, Ivan. Ivan, if you would, please give us some closing thoughts here as we end this interview. It was a great getting to know you, talking with you. If people want to learn more about the content that you put out, the classes that you do, let everyone know a little bit more about it.
Sure. So basically, I mean, I have my YouTube channel. I try to put the best work. I've been operating for about a year now. I've seen all the ups and downs with all the markets, everything. I mean, I know a year is not a lot in terms of time-wise, but in the crypto markets, 1 year, it's basically like 5 to 10 years in the financial market. So what I do have is I've been launching my regular online classes that I've actually launched that just recently. If you go to cryptobud.net, you can find more information about just getting educated about crypto. If you basically this is your first time in, I also have a Patreon page that I kind of do exclusive kind of market updates that are not on YouTube, just to kind of reward the people who support the channel. And that's actually on patreon.com/CryptoBud. And I also have a more of an elite trading room that I work with some of the people who are a lot more serious and have a larger bankroll. That's my Nova program that I run. In Los Angeles, this is my home base. I run offline classes once every other month on the weekends, where you get to come in, we get to talk with people, and I run it like a regular school. I teach people the ins and outs of crypto, how to get jump started without having to go on like Reddit forums and Twitter and trying to put it all together. I put it all in a nice 1 to 2 day workshop. And I'll be releasing those dates out on cryptobud.net, where you guys can check the schedules out. Unfortunately, my travel arrangements kind of limit me to Los Angeles, so most people usually fly in here. We just launched our last one back in March. It was a success. We had people flying in from Singapore. I had people flying in from Arizona. It was great. We had people all over the world coming in to Los Angeles to learn about crypto. And I usually tell this people, you can find all this information online yourselves, but I can jumpstart the process where you're not going to be spending out like 20, 30 hours trying to figure out what is actually a scam, what's not a scam. And as somebody who's been in the space for almost a year already, just doing social media, but also been in the financial markets for over 18 years, I can tell you some of the pitfalls and some of the things that you can probably avoid. As you already know, scams are just almost everywhere right now on Twitter. I mean, people are inventing random stuff. So that's a great way to connect. Even if you don't want to do any of that, you can go to my channel. I usually do technical analysis. I do coin reviews. I do interviews with ICOs, with founders. I just came back from conferences. I also kind of report back to all my members. So there's a lot of great stuff that you can find on my channel. Obviously, I'm not the only one, but I really encourage everyone to seek out somewhere or someone that you can kind of not have to do everything yourself. You know, reinvent the wheel, so to speak. Because I I messed up. My first couple of months starting crypto, I think I lost. I think I almost lost my hair. I went bald because of the FOMO and the FUD. And now, yeah, I could say that I'm a little bit more seasoned. And definitely, it's a resource that I think I'm trying to build a community. I'm trying to build for people, especially because you turn on to CNBC and there really isn't a lot of stuff out there. So, yeah. But thank you very much for having me here today.
Absolutely. Well, Ivan, thanks for coming on Crush the Street. It was a pleasure having you on. And yeah, absolutely. CNBC, I think someone brought up cryptocurrency to Jim Cramer, and he was just like, about that stuff.
And you know what? You know what's interesting? The sad part about it is that the people who are watching CNBC are the people who actually probably want something that's going to change their lives. Mm-hmm. And I think that although I think those are great shows, I think there's something good about financial media. The problem is crypto is the future. And with some closing thoughts about me, why I'm doing this and why I'm putting myself out there in the space is because if I see an opportunity, I do want to participate in the community and also be able to talk to people like yourself and Crush the Street, where we can bounce ideas off and not have to be alone in the entire space. Because I feel that the stuff I've learned, I think somebody else could benefit from it, especially if it's something that I could have improved on. So thank you for this opportunity. I really appreciate the time.
It should be noted that the people talking about cryptocurrency were on the alternative media, right? It was YouTubers and Twitter, people on Twitter and blogs and forums that got people into crypto in the first place. It wasn't CNBC.
You got it.
People a lot of money in cryptocurrency. So anyways, having said that, Ivan, thanks for coming on Crush the Street. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the time, Kenneth.